Hey everyone, how are you all doing? Hope you've had a good day, morning, or evening. I know it's been a hot minute since I've last uploaded, but I'm finally back, and we get to take a look at one of our favorite fanboys, known for his absolute great opinions. I'm sure you know who it is. It's Harmon Smith. He's back. He's ready to tell us one of his greatest takes to ever exist. He's truly going to enlighten us. So where should we start with his video? I believe we should start with the title, as it holds some very interesting information. Starting off strong with the title, Final Fantasy XVI confirmed massive failure. Nintendo fanboy Harmon Smith was right again. Honestly, the biggest takeaway is him admitting he's a fanboy. So let's see if he is right about this, that Final Fantasy XVI is a failure.
It's been a couple of weeks since Final Fantasy XVI launched, and, my predictions have proven 100% true. The game undersold compared to Final Fantasy XV. It sold like 3 million units at launch, or shipped 3 million units at launch.
3 million units at launch is not that bad, Harmon. If I'm correct, the average for the industry on the first week is 5 million. That is not a bad number. I'm sure they want it to be higher, as I think even that is still a low number. But that's still not a number to be ashamed of. I'm curious how you think that this made the franchise either dead or dying.
Its sales have dropped like 90% over the next couple of weeks. It's looking like a real disaster at Square Enix. And
interesting half-truth, Harmon. Of course, I can rely upon you to over-exaggerate something.
I don't see a lot of people talking about what this means. I don't see a lot of people addressing it. Like, there are a handful of Twitter users finally addressing what was obvious to me a couple of weeks ago, that Final Fantasy XVI was going to bomb. So let's talk about the long-term consequences of this. What is going to happen?
First, they would look at what went wrong, what can they improve, and what people didn't like. So, for example, people, from what I heard, don't really like the cutscenes. There is just too many of them, and they're too often that it takes up the majority of the game. Or they could look at their marketing cycle. Maybe that could have been the problem. Was it too short? Too long? Did people lose interest? Did they not grab as many people as possible? There are many factors that lead into something like this. Since I don't ever plan on playing Final Fantasy, I wouldn't know.
100% Square Enix is done. This is it for them. This is it. It's over. Done and dusted. This is the end result of them, constantly worshipping PlayStation.
Yes, having a good business relationship is definitely worshipping. 100%. And of course, we can all say that Square Enix is going down somewhat of a shitty slope because they released a game, well, published a game called Forspoken, and we can all agree that it's ass. But since they're still able to pump a bunch of money into franchises like Final Fantasy, I don't think they're very close to being dead.
Constantly trying to recreate the success of Final Fantasy VII, and constantly undermining their talent, constantly downplaying the success of Nintendo RPGs, constantly.
Yes, they are very much going out of their way to target Nintendo RPGs. I absolutely agree, 100%. I am not being sarcastic at all.
Trying to move away from their classic turn-based RPG style and focus of chasing westernized trends. This is a.
I'm not surprised that they're chasing trends. Every company does it. They want to make as much money as possible. It's more of a no shit, Sherlock.
Direct result of their actions. They are in a position where there is no righting this ship, right? This has been in the works for 20 years, since the release of.
Fuck, you are a bit schizo today, aren't you, Harmon? Really choosing all the right words today. Let's see, do I have any schizo takes on my list? The For Honor devs don't play their fucking game. There you go, very schizo.
Since before the release of Final Fantasy X-2, right? This has been an issue since Final Fantasy VIII, in which, a game that Sakaguchi didn't directly work on all that much, that came out with new talent and was just a complete disaster with, a focus on a story that didn't make any sense and characters, but people loved it because, it's Final Fantasy on PlayStation.
Come on, we can keep that same analogy for Nintendo. Let's say, oh shit, Zelda's on Nintendo, so everyone instantly loved it. Instead of just enjoying the game for what it is, or enjoying the franchise because they actually enjoy other stuff in that franchise. Everyone has different tastes. Some may have liked the turn-based, some may like the third-person shit. It's just how it be, it's how games are now, and it's how franchises are if they want to innovate, change, or do whatever. Final Fantasy seems to have a decent amount of games under its belt, so it's not surprised that every game's not gonna constantly hit every release.
Let's downplay all these weird problems with the junction system and the plot that doesn't make any sense, and just the mediocre gameplay. Let's just hype this up as the next big thing. This was what considered one of the best RPGs ever made for a long time.
With the amount of games under its belt, I'm not surprised it's a good RPG. I would have expected them to either find a niche or find a community that is willing to stick by their games. Your community is your lifeblood. And having that many games under your belt shows that you have done something right.
Purely because of the Final Fantasy branding. And then, of course, Final Fantasy X had problems. 10-2 was a complete disaster. People don't even talk about 10-2. 11 was a disaster. 12, 13, 13-2, 13-3, 14. Like, who do you know who even talks about the...
How many fucking games do they have? You know what? I'm gonna take a look at that. So there are 16 main games and a fucking ton of spin-offs. No way people are able to keep track of this shit.
Original release of 14, 15, and now 16. Like, Final Fantasy has been bad now longer than it ever was good, right?
If it's as bad as you say it is, why hasn't the entire franchise just died out or gone on ice? If it was that bad, they wouldn't be releasing new games.
Final Fantasy VI came out in, 1994, right? So, they had 6 great games, right? 7 was okay. 8 was a disaster. It's been a downward spiral ever since.
Well, of course, not every game's going to land, especially for a franchise that is that old. I would be impressed if every game hit as hard. Since I've never played a Final Fantasy game, I can't tell you from experience which one is good, which one is bad. But just to fuck with Harmon, maybe I'll start off with 16 just to take the piss out of him. I'll buy a PlayStation just for that.
It's extended to a lot of other aspects of their business. It's expanded to their other IPs, their other franchises. It's become a complete train wreck, and nobody has wanted to admit it for the longest time. To the point where Final Fantasy 16 is a straight up failure. And not only are people not wanting to admit it, they're trying to downplay the reasons why it happened.
So what is the reason then why it's a failure? Is it because it didn't see expected sale numbers? Of course they're not going to see it on the first day. They would probably see it after their first quarter. Especially for a franchise that long-lived, they probably do have an expectation of how much they're going to get every game. And my one big problem with you, Harmon, is that you don't share the reason with everyone in your videos. It would help if you just had a bit of a script in your videos to talk about some of the shit, because maybe someone would actually agree with you.
They're trying to ignore that Square Enix, one of the major pillars of PlayStation exclusives in the 90s, the developers behind the lauded Final Fantasy VII, right? One of the most overhyped games ever made.
I do find it funny how every game you dislike is now overhyped trash, even though you said it was relatively okay. Can you at least keep consistent in your videos? It would be so good if you could do that. Yeah, you can agree that some things good can be overhyped, but holy shit, you do not keep consistent.
Are in the process of going bankrupt. They are in the process of losing their branding. They have lost everything that made Final Fantasy special, and nobody wants to admit it. Nobody wants to admit that this series is a shell of its former self and is in no way capable of competing with its contemporaries in any way, shape, or form.
I don't know, man. Selling 3 million copies is still pretty good for an exclusive, especially after the first couple of days. That is pretty good. Who knows what it will be like after their first earnings report.
It's hilarious to me how Zelda has managed to eclipse Final Fantasy in spite of Final Fantasy traditionally being quite a bit more popular than it, especially in the 90s.
As long as both are doing well, I see no problem.
Final Fantasy had a much bigger following for a long time because of being a story-driven franchise and riding off the anime hype of the 90s and just being a PlayStation exclusive, one of the most overhyped PlayStation franchises.
I still find it funny that every game you dislike is still overhyped. It brings me absolute joy that if someone produces a good game, you hate it with an absolute passion. Unless it's Nintendo, you will absolutely fucking die for it.
Ever, right? Final Fantasy, the legendary Final Fantasy VII. It was so bad that, Final Fantasy VII R got re-released, and a lot of people who haven't played an RPG since 7.
I like how you keep telling people Final Fantasy VII was terrible, but yet in the same video, you say it's so financially successful. Not many games can be garbage, but financially successful. And from what I've heard from people I talked to, the game was pretty good.
Got back into it and tried saying it was the best RPG I've ever played, in spite of, never playing any other RPGs. It's
I don't know, man. Sounds like a Harmon Smith cope. He just doesn't like people having a different opinion. It would not surprise me. I feel like he would kill a man for having a different opinion.
For a long time, like Final Fantasy was coasting off in nostalgia. That worship of the brand. Like the series can't do anything wrong. It has the best stories.
Hey, doesn't that sound like a certain fanboy that we're criticizing today? No way. Self-awareness is through the roof.
The best graphics, the best music, the best turn-based gameplay. Like, it's the best there is at what it does. And over the past 20 years, it's becoming increasingly obvious that isn't the case. Dragon Quest does what Final Fantasy does better. Fire Emblem.
I do find it funny that you only name games that are exclusive to the Nintendo platform. I mean, that isn't entirely true. There is one Dragon Quest game that isn't. But I'm sure you can name many good games. They don't need to be exclusive, of course, but I'm sure those are the favorites of yours to pick in any argument.
Has its audience. You have like Shin Megami Tensei, you have Persona, you have like these other subsidiary franchises. You have like all these smaller JRPGs that are just building more and more of an audience because Final Fantasy, which used to be the premier JRPG franchise worldwide, has been like slowly losing its audience.
Like I've said, a franchise that old is going to have its ups and downs. In my eyes, I would consider it to be one of the biggest. I personally don't play many of them, so I wouldn't know. I would have to say that the only JRPGs that I've ever played would be any Souls games from Software. And those things slap absolutely fucking hard.
For due to all the bad decisions they've made. And it's not just a result of Final Fantasy 16, right? Like, a lot of people are making this mistake.
The only bad thing I've heard about Final Fantasy 16 is that it's more cutscene than game. Since I've only had one friend that has actually played the game, he mainly says that progression for combat is pretty okay. It's nothing too special. The longer you play, the more you unlock, repeat the process. But the biggest takeaway is that the gameplay is pretty fun, but it comes at the cost of the game being a glorified movie, which, depending on who you ask, it can be good or bad.
Like, Final Fantasy 16 looked bad, or it looked underwhelming, or people weren't into it. No, if anything, I saw the trailer and was kind of intrigued by it. I thought that, like, maybe I might check it out on PC, but, like, no, I'm not buying a PlayStation 5 for it. I'm not buying it right when it comes out, but, like, I thought, like, I could see myself, yeah, maybe I'll try it out, like, at some point in the future, but
I can kind of agree with that. I won't buy a console just to play one game. I believe that no console should really have exclusives. You're kind of just wasting out a fuck ton of money by keeping it on one platform. That's up to them. They need to drive an incentive to purchase that console. And if Final Fantasy was that, I'm sure you got what you were looking for.
I still don't own Final Fantasy 15. I've still never played 14. I've never played 13. And when you've gone this long without playing like a new mainline Final Fantasy game, like, it's really difficult to get back into it.
That sounds like a you issue, Harmon. If I want to play a game badly, I will go play it.
Like, the people who are buying this stuff religiously have like gotten to the point now where they've broken the habit of buying every new Final Fantasy game, hoping it's going to be good out of like respect and love for the iconic originals, right?
No way. Final Fantasy fanboys? I gotta find those. They sound like a load of fun. Or it could just be people who enjoy the games. It's that simple. If I enjoyed a franchise, I would buy every game.
They bought all these sequels, all of these games, because of the branding, because of the legacy, because of the IP. And they've reached the point now.
Oh my god, what do I buy a Final Fantasy game for? To play Final Fantasy. What do I buy a Dark Souls game for? To play Dark Souls. No fucking shit, they're gonna buy the game again.
Where, nobody really cares anymore, where a mainline Final Fantasy game can come out and just get stomped into the dirt by the Nintendo Switch, by what Nintendo is doing, right? Like, it's not even like competitive anymore.
I don't know about you, Harmon. A lot of people did seem to have a lot of interest in Final Fantasy 16. It seems like it was one of the biggest games of this year. Just like Zelda, just like Starfield. These games all have a lot of hype around them.
Right? Back in the day, they used to like, even when like the sales were going down with 13, like they at least were able to be major releases, but 16, I don't think it's going to be that. Like, I think this is like a massive disaster.
Oh my god, it is so much of a disaster. It is definitely Cyberpunk on launch. Oh my god, the fucking horror.
And I don't think there's any correcting this. I don't think there's anything Square Enix could possibly do, right?
Square Enix can only do wrong, Nintendo can only do good. Seems very reasonable coming from you. Because if Final Fantasy was exclusive to Nintendo, you would never shit on it. You would never tell anyone that it's garbage, you would only say, it is good no matter what. But since Square Enix only has it on PlayStation, it's instantly garbage no matter what.
They can't go back to Nintendo. Nintendo already has their own RPG franchises that are better than modern Final.
I don't think Nintendo cares. If they buy something off of their storefront, they get a cut of that money. That's free money for them.
Final Fantasy, right? They can't keep relying on Sony money because they're leaving the industry. Like, it's legit possible that with PlayStation going downhill the way it is, Square Enix.
PlayStation is 100% going downhill. I absolutely agree. Definitely. Not like there's very much no proof that they're going downhill. Xbox and PlayStation are both somewhat struggling to pull their weight within recent years.
Enix might be in an extremely compromising position where the company that has propped them up since the 90s is suddenly going to stop producing consoles, and suddenly, the audience that, worship Final Fantasy.
Yes, they're going to stop producing consoles next year, 100%, definitely very soon. Not like we're not even close to getting to that full digital age that they may want to turn everything into a subscription service. It's not going to be happening for another 10 to 15 years. We don't have the infrastructure for that shit yet.
As one of their pillars is it's going to be homeless. Xbox doesn't care about Final Fantasy. Nintendo, loves Final Fantasy, but we have alternatives. We have several other JRPG franchises that have actually had relevant high-quality releases in the...
I don't think Nintendo's gonna give a shit if it's high quality or not. That's a big franchise to have on your system. That's a more than enough reason to get it. That would make you a lot more money, and especially that it's on your ecosystem. You get a cut of that money for each purchase you get. Imagine if Nintendo got God of War, Halo, Gears of War, Horizon, Last of Us, any of those games. That would be a big W.
The past 20 years. Who exactly would get excited over the 13 trilogy is coming to Switch? That's not a thing that's going to happen ever, right?
I'm sure a lot of people would be very happy for it. Also, chalky milk at the end, very cool.
It's embarrassing how bad these things have gotten. I remember asking for a release of Final Fantasy 15 on Switch, and I never asked for a release of Final Fantasy 16, right?
So you do want Final Fantasy on Switch. Make up your fucking mind. Hear me out, I got a really cool business venture for all of you. What if we created a Harmon Smith law book? Every bullshit take he has, put into one book, where we can all point and laugh. I guarantee it's very profitable, definitely not a scam.
I know it can be released. I know there's something stopping them from doing it. I know it could easily run on the Switch. I know that, right?
So you know they have an exclusivity contract. Why don't you tell Nintendo to try and speedrun and get one for themselves? I'm sure you've got personal contact with them. There's no way someone like you doesn't fanboy and doesn't get free shit from them.
But I don't want the game. I don't need it. I don't care about it at all. I have so many other games I need to play. I'm just not all that interested in playing yet another mediocre...
Less than 2 minutes ago, you said you wanted it. This makes no fucking sense.
Final Fantasy game, and I think the vast majority of the audience feels the exact same way as I do. The days of Final Fantasy being one of the biggest brands in gaming are long over.
That's right, man. If Nintendo doesn't have Final Fantasy, it will never be good again. And that is the end of Harmon's video. What's the biggest takeaway from this video? Make Final Fantasy great again. Well, that's it from me, boys. I'll see you all later. I'm gonna head back to work, and maybe after that go play Dark Souls 2 or some shit. If you want to help me reach 1,000 subs, would greatly appreciate it. You boys will take care.